So today I mostly wanted to talk about the fire hardening defensible space requirements. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And then let's see. I need to bring up. Let me move this over here. Hang on one second. There we go. Okay, so can you see that form? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it looks
Okay.
good.
Very good. So basically, there was a new state law that went into effect on July 1st of this year, so 2021. So it's relatively new. When this was all being done, there was also an earlier law that went into effect January 1st, but it was a softer law. So anyway, this one kind of I wish that Carr and people had done a little bit better job of explaining this early on, because this definitely added a big requirement to potentially to the point of sale for a whole bunch of housing in San Diego. So it's super important, and we're over the last couple months we're just realizing how impactful that can be. And we're hoping to get a little bit more clarification, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So when does this form apply? So so this form applies when four conditions are met. The first condition is that whatever we're selling is 1 to 4 units. So that's going to be pretty much everything that we sell, right? And then and that would include condos or single family homes. And then the second condition is that the home was constructed before January 1st, 2010. So anything built after that, we don't need this form for. But that, again, is most of what we sell. And then if the seller is required to complete a real estate transfer disclosure statement, so that's basically every property that we sell they're required to provide a TDS with very few exceptions. And then the fourth requirement is that the home is located in either a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. So the last part there, initially we weren't quite sure. We waited for the natural hazard disclosure statements to come through, but we can actually find out that information earlier than that, and then obviously the NHD report will verify it. So the NHD reports are getting pretty good about, there'll be a specific box checked, it's either in or out. So it won't be too hard to figure out whether it's in a high or very high fire zone. But what I'm going to do is show you how, like, if you were taking a listing or potentially if you were writing an offer, and this will come into play a little bit later as we talk some more, how you might want to know all up front whether it's in a high or very high fire zone. Because I think what we might start to see over time is that when buyers submit offers, they may be requesting that the seller get an inspection, a fire defensible space inspection, basically. So I will go to, so there's a link that is HTTPS and this fire.ca.gov, and then you can put in FHD anyway /. So if you click that link, what it does is it takes you to it'll take you to, let me get rid of this for now. Okay, move Okay. So then once you have the CAL FIRE map up, you can click these little binoculars over here, and then that'll bring up a window. So I'm going to put in an address of one that I recently had. 910. So I put in the address, and then I'll click the little search. And so then we can zoom in a little bit. So it puts the dot of where the house is, which, you know, looks right because I, you know, obviously I was there. So I know that's the right one. So then basically what I'm doing is I'm looking at the color code. And over here on this fire map, we can click this button for the legend. And then, so if this area around this house where the house is was showing this bright red color, then we would know it's in a very high. If it came back as the pink area, we would know then it's very high. So there's very high and high. So anyway, you'll see when we do it, but you'll be able to tell by the color is essentially how it goes. So what I'm going to do now is go to a different one. And this is one that Daniel and Brian had, and this is 322. So that, see the difference? How that listing that they have comes up in a red zone. So that one, they, you know, by looking at this map, they would know ahead of time when they went to take the listing, or if they were writing an offer, they would be able to check this map and see. So that's if you ever want to do that, you'll know how.
Troy, what's the VH, the LRA, like what's the difference between LRA and SRA? What are those?
I'm not 100% sure. Daniel, do you know?
Yeah, LRA is local responsible area, and then SRA is state responsibility area.
Oh yeah. Right here.
So local responsibility area would mean, like on this property, it's in the city of San Diego, so it's the city of San Diego that's the fire department of the city of San Diego that's in charge of that. Whereas
who's in charge of basically
right.
enforcing the hardening requirements?
Yeah.
Oh,
so if you went to
gotcha.
if you went to like a more rural area, like if you went to Ramona or something, you might find the light pink or orange or something, and it would be state responsible.
Troy, will you put in my address?
Yes. Your new one?
Yeah.
There's gonna be a little fire emojis.
Yeah. I mean, I already know it's high fire, but 1291 Canyon Drive. I just want to see what the map actually looks like on it.
That's
Julian.
Yeah.
Also, it is pink.
So that would be basically
the state. So CAL FIRE is in charge of that one.
Right.
And that would be, that basically would determine who you ordered the inspection from if you wanted to have.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Afshin, did you have a question?
No, the same question she has. Actually.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Very good. All right. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the form then, and we'll move that over there. So now we know kind of how to tell whether it's in or not in a very high fire zone. So I'm going to skip down to, this talks about where to locate the information. This talks about defensible space up there. There are this little link right here, readyforwildfire.org, can help talk about ways to protect the home from wildfires. So anyway, that your clients can always go and look at that to see how to defend the space. And there's different requirements. Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's like a 5-foot radius, and then there's a 100-foot radius, and then
Yeah, they have like recommendations and guidelines as far as it's from the where the actual house is, not the property line. So from the house within the first 5 feet, they don't want certain things like a dead bush, which shouldn't be 5 feet from the house. And then I think the next one is 50 feet, and the next one's 100 feet. And there's all sorts of different things. So like if you have a tree, the tree branch shouldn't be within like 10 feet of a chimney. Also all sorts of stuff like that.
And you can find that kind of information, you know, at that that handy little website right there. So then what happens if it's not? So then basically, in terms of how like the thought process goes, I'm trying to make like a flow chart, and I have sort of an idea of what it would look like, but it's not done yet. So basically, if it's not in a high or very high fire zone, then it's pretty simple. You can check the box here that says the home is not in a very high or high fire zone. And again, one thing I want to caution, you know, risk management wise, we can look this stuff up early, but obviously we're not experts at reading maps and whatnot. So we do want to make sure that we confirm that with the NHD report, which, you know, should come back and verify that as well. And so if it's not in a high or very high fire zone, you check the box, and then the seller can voluntarily answer these questions. They don't have to, but they can voluntarily answer those questions. And these are if the seller is aware of any of the following features. So if it's not in a very high fire zone, they really don't, you know, they're not on the hook to even fill that out necessarily. But I think what's going to happen is that most of the people will be expecting this form anyway. So pretty simple if the home is not in a very high fire zone. Not quite as simple if it is in a very high fire zone. So if it is, then the seller does have to, of course, fill out part 3 here where they're answering these questions. And again, some of this information, if you go to the website, will be a little bit more clear what it is. Most of these questions are fairly okay. You know, are there single pane windows? Yes or no kind of thing. But some of it is a little bit more subjective. So that's that part. And then we get down to part 4, which is the really tricky part. So part 4 is where we're talking about potentially point of sale requirements and the need to have someone from a fire jurisdiction, whether it be the state of California or the city of San Diego or the city of La Mesa or the city of El Cajon. So again, there's a whole bunch of there's a statewide law now that's driving this. But then there's a whole bunch of local municipalities that have jurisdiction over who would do the inspection and whether there's actually truly a point of sale requirement or not. So the first option under part 4 is to leave it to not check any boxes. You could check box B1, B2, B3, or B4. We're going to go through each of those. So if we just leave it as the boilerplate form, then what we're saying is that there's no local ordinance and that the buyer should obtain documentation of compliance with the new state defensible law. There's no local ordinance requiring proof of compliance with defensible space laws. The buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance within 1 year of the close of escrow. This requirement only applies if there is a state or local agency basically capable of doing that inspection. So that's sort of what a boilerplate one is. This part here, though.
I have a question, Troy.
Yes.
Do we know where there is an ordinance that would require?
Right. That's where it gets really tricky. So,
okay.
so yeah. So, Daniel with the one that he, recently had for his brother, so made all kinds of phone calls, did all kinds of research and everything. And so I'll back up a little bit. When Daniel and I both were in the training class from CAR, where they had the CAR legal attorney, California Associated Legal Attorney. His name is Gov Hutchison, and he did a little update on fire hardening. This was prior to July 1st, but it was in 2021. And he basically said that with this new law that was going to be coming, that really there was only one or two places in the state of California that actually had a point of sale requirement for fire hardening. But since then, what we found is that it's really hard to get a definitive answer from these entities because, again, it's the city of Laguna, it's the city of Newport, it's the city of San Diego, it's La Mesa, it's the county of San Diego, or not, like if they're in an unincorporated area. And so it appears to me that's what's happening is that different areas of the jurisdiction, they're interpreting what the state did differently than what the CAR Legal had interpreted it. And so a lot of the local municipalities are saying, yes, of course we have, defensible space rules. Yes, of course it has to be done with the point of sale. That's what this California law meant. And, so you have to do it. But what Gov Hutchison was saying is that, do they actually have a written point of sale rule? And so it's super confusing. We're hoping that CAR Legal, as well as the state, will clarify it a little bit better. But for now, just know that that there's going to be a little bit of confusion. Some agents are going to march forward one way. Some agents are going to march forward a different way. It's hard to know what really is the right thing, other than we do know that almost every area, so specifically the city of San Diego, has had for a long time defensible space requirements. If you are on a canyon, you already knew that you were supposed to clear it 100 feet. And so what this part one is saying is there a local ordinance? It's not actually technically saying, is there a local point of sale ordinance? So to my mind, this one doesn't really apply very well because, of course, there is a defensible space ordinance within the city of San Diego. Same thing with the county. They do have that where you would want to clear your property if you were, but mostly what we had known before were canyon lots and things like that. But what you'll see from that map, when you go to research different properties, a lot of things come up that are in a very high fire zone that were not completely intuitive before. So this is going to pop up on a lot of properties. So I'll let Daniel speak for just a quick second here, but in my mind, I don't think that if it's in a very high or high fire zone that we would go with option number one very often. And I'll let Daniel tell what his experience with his Fox Run sale was.
Yeah, and just to add, so the real confusing part of this, Troy kind of touched on it, was the new law that went into effect. It has nothing to do with whether or not there are defensible space ordinances, because they've been on the books in statewide and countywide and citywide for a very long time. It's the fact that the sellers have to disclose it. And so then that's the tricky part, is whether or not they have to disclose it, yes, but do they have to have some sort of proof before or after escrow closes? So I think that's where it's added a lot of confusion, is because I watched a webinar that involved a representative here in San Diego with CAL FIRE, and his interpretation was that this is now a point of sale issue, whereas I also watched the webinar because we have a property up in Orange County, And there was representatives from the fire department of Newport Beach, and one from Laguna Beach, and one from, I think, Cal Fire up there. And they basically said there is not a point of sale requirement. And so it goes into an issue of interpretation of the new law, not that it's creating this new defensible space ordinance. It's just whether it has to just show proof of compliance. But like, so the property that Troy pulled up earlier on Fox Run Way, it's a townhome in a HOA, and it's near a canyon, and so it was in a quote unquote very high fire hazard severity zone. The problem with it was that the sellers don't do anything with the landscape because it's in an HOA. There's very large pine trees all throughout the HOA, so that was kind of a little bit of a concern. Is if we have this inspection happen, are they going to say, "Oh, you need to cut down this pine tree in front," and then the seller can't do that because they're not going to go cut down a tree in their HOA. So what we did on that one was it was the city of San Diego, and I actually researched and I found the city of San Diego has a place where the way they were writing it kind of implied that it was a point of sale requirement, but I couldn't really get a definitive answer from anyone. So what we did was we actually emailed the buyer's agent and said, we have this form, we haven't sent it over to you yet with the rest of the disclosures because, to be honest, we're a little confused. And we asked him, do you have any experience with any properties since this law went into effect? And basically he agreed that it's confusing, and he said, I think what we should do, well, backtracking, he also felt like this form or this ordinance doesn't apply to condominiums, even though I think it does. So basically we came to agreement of, let's go ahead and send this form. We'll have up at the top where it says it's in a very high zone. That's a given, we know that. And we'll just leave it as is. So paragraph 4B, we didn't check any boxes. We just left it as is, even though city of San Diego, I think, does have a local ordinance. So we sent it, buyer signed it, and escrow's closed. Is that the most accurate way to do it? I don't know. But that goes in the confusion of when it's supposed to be required.
Right. And so again, we're really, really hoping that there'll be some more clarity, and that over time it'll be clear, because as Daniel mentioned, the city of San Diego didn't come out and say specifically, yes, we have a point of sale requirement where you have to prove, actually have your seller fill out the form, request an inspection from the fire authority, and then they come out and then they will either tell you these items need to be corrected, or they'll give you a clear report. The reason it's a big deal is that another thing that we found out is that if there is work to be done, then that puts the seller in a bit of a bind because, and even potentially the buyer, because what we found out from it was the local Cal Fire guy, right, Daniel? That said,
yeah. So
he
was local. He dealt with county
of San Diego, right?
Yeah.
But what he was saying is that if there's work to be done, the seller has 30 days from the date of the inspection to correct the work, to have the work done. So if you needed to have 3 trees cut down and 50 feet of brush cleared off your canyon, you have 30 days to do it. And then if you don't do it in 30 days, I think they come back 2 weeks after that, and they give you a 2-week warning. And then it becomes I think a $1,000 fine, and then a $5,000 fine, and then a misdemeanor. Like, it's really, really onerous and very, very short in terms of the amount of time that they give for the correction of the work.
Wow.
So yeah, that's really, really a tricky part. So we don't necessarily, there are agents out there. There's a couple agents in my mastermind group who they're actually going out telling their seller, they had a single family house on a canyon lot. They told their seller, here, go to this website, order the inspection. It's what you're supposed to do. For them, it turned out okay because they got the inspection in a timely manner. It came back that the place was clear. But, let's say that the agent had given the advice to go do the inspection, but didn't also warn them that, hey, this could cost you $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever. The minute you invite them in, then you've now set the clock for how quickly you have to remedy that. So that's kind of why when we, as we were delving more into this, we realized how crazy and serious some of these ramifications are.
Troy, can you scroll down a little so I can see what 3 and 4 are?
Yeah. So we'll go through. So that was basically option number 1. You can, if you leave it blank, the seller's basically saying there's no local ordinance, which I don't really think is true. I think a better option would be to check box number 3 that says there is a local vegetation management or defensible space ordinance in effect, which permits compliance after the close of escrow. Buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with defensible space law. There is a local ordinance requiring proof of compliance with defensible space laws that does not require compliance to be obtained prior to close of escrow. Buyer shall comply after the close. So basically, this is saying that
it's on the buyer.
Yeah, that will put it off to the buyer. Now, obviously, the buyer will need to agree. And so this is one of those things where we may see over time that, especially if we're not in a seller's market, we may see over time that the buyer is writing in their offer, hey, we know it's on a canyon. We want you to prove to us you have compliance with this. We don't want to inherit that risk. So your buyer would have to agree to do it on their own. Actually, even under number 1, the buyer is still agreeing to do it on their own. It's just that there wasn't necessarily a box that alerted them to that. But the only difference between the two is just that the seller is saying there is local management, vegetation management, and this one they're saying there isn't a local ordinance. Then box number 2 was again, if there's no local ordinance, the seller could have voluntarily gotten, filled out the information, requested an inspection, gotten the inspection, and then they would have documentation that it was cleared. So, so the whole thing is basically revolving around, does the seller order the inspection up front, or do they put that off to the buyer? That's sort of the meat of the thing. If they do want to order it up front, again, it goes back to which jurisdiction, but we do have the websites for if it's the city of San Diego, and then there's also, you would order it basically through CAL FIRE if it's the unincorporated areas. So we have those links, but you want to have the seller order the inspection. You don't want to do it for them as their agent. Because it is going to, there were some reasons why, well, for risk management, because again, it could be a $10,000 fix, and the seller could say, well, we didn't intend for you to do that, so that's one thing. But B, in the application to have the inspection, there were some of the agents in my mastermind group that were saying there was another reason why it needs, it definitely needs to be in the seller's name when they fill out the application. The other option to check is that there is a local vegetation management ordinance in effect, which requires compliance prior to the close of escrow. So if we got a ruling somewhere that that we all knew, that all the agents in San Diego City, that we all knew that San Diego County definitely had a point of sale requirement, then that would stop the debate, right? For now, they imply that there is, but they haven't really shown anything in writing to our knowledge. So we think it's still possible if the buyer were to agree to accept that responsibility after close. So this is where, if the seller did have an inspection, they would check that box, and then they would attach the inspection, report and clearance there. So basically, I'm not sure I explained that, super well, but at least, now you've kind of seen it. It won't be your first, if someone brings it up, or if you're going to be taking a listing, or even if you're writing an offer on a home on a canyon lot, you for sure, might want to look up that map and see whether it's in a high fire zone or not, high or very high. And then, just sort of approach the subject with your client about that. And if you have a listing where you have plenty of time, then, maybe the seller could go ahead and get the inspection if they want to, because then they would have time to, do some of the work, and it wouldn't potentially hold up escrow. I'll shut up for a second because I'm sure you guys probably have some questions, or Daniel might have some things to add.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add, so basically box 1 and box 2 are, if there's not some sort of, so local ordinance in my view would be a city. So the city of San Diego, La Mesa, Carlsbad, whereas box 3 and 4 are, or sorry, the other way around. Box 1 and 2 would be if there is no city, so it would be the state through CAL FIRE, basically. And then box 3 and 4 would be if there is a city that's responsible for it. And the problem with it really is there's no perfect answer because we don't have the clarification. So like if we said box 3 because we believe that there isn't a point of sale requirement, we could have checked that for the city of San Diego property. But if there was a point of sale requirement, we just basically had the seller fill out the form wrong. So it's confusing, but yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that Daniel did discover in his research for a different property that he had for up north was, who was it? The city of Laguna Beach or Newport specifically said we do not have a point of sale requirement.
Yeah,
that is like the most helpful
webinar that I watched with. It was sponsored by the Orange County Association of Realtors, and it had the representative from the fire department of Laguna Beach, and then one from the city of Newport Beach. And they both said in the webinar, we do not have a point of sale requirement. The other interesting thing too is, I don't know about San Diego, where, for at least the local, but for like the webinar we watched for the Orange County one, the city of Newport Beach says they charge $219 for their inspections. Now, granted, Newport Beach is one of the most richest zip codes in the country, but Laguna Beach said they do not currently have a inspection fee. And then the representative, who again, I think was from the CAL FIRE up in Orange County, she said they do not currently have an inspection fee. So everyone I've heard about fees for the inspections either said there is a fee, or currently they do not have a fee. I don't know about San Diego.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. If you guys heard if anyone charges a fee, I bet CAL FIRE, because that's statewide, right? I bet they don't.
I don't think they do, and because we did watch a webinar that was here in San Diego, and there was a representative from CAL FIRE in San Diego, and he was basically saying, which is the funny thing, I don't know how many properties they cover, but he was the person that was in charge of this program, and he was the person that would go out and do the inspections. So if you think about like how many sales would he have to go through, and he said that they're usually able to do it within several days, get that done. But he knew that the city of San Diego was having a backlog. So that throws another, factor in, is if this all has to happen during the escrow, most escrows are closing within 30 days or less. So,
yeah,
but
that does definitely pose a problem in some cases, especially if you want to do it fast.
Yeah.
My other thing that I was thinking is just, I don't know at what point we're going to figure all this out, but we just need a list of all the San Diego County cities and like nearby areas that just say like, is there a point of sale ordinance or not? Yes or no, you know, and just have like a definitive list of, you know, whether or not everything, whether that city or that unincorporated area has one. Cause yeah, that's super confusing. Like we need to know, like to be able to fill out this form accurately, we need to know that.
Yes, that would be super helpful. And it's amazing how hard it is to get that information. And again, I think a piece of it is that there's hundreds, if not thousands statewide of different municipalities, and they're interpreting the law differently. And some of them are hanging their hat on the fact that they had any kind of vegetation management and saying, oh yes, then this law means that there's a point of sale requirement. But then other ones are interpreting the same law and saying, no, that's not what it does. So again, I think more will be clarified over time, and within the city of San Diego, I'm sure there'll be an industry standard here before too long that we'll just we'll be able to do. But for now, the city of San Diego, like we said, is implying that they have one point of sale, but haven't seen it actually in writing to this point. But you'll probably come across agents who believe there are, and you'll probably come across agents who believe there isn't.
So I would venture to guess in areas like Julian and Ramona and stuff that are managed by CAL FIRE, and not like the city of San Diego, or where any of where any of the areas where it was like the dark red, where it was the local or whatever. LRA, I think they said it was identified as, but I'm guessing the areas that are CAL FIRE managed do have an ordinance, because even just when you drive up there's signs like along the highway that say like 100 feet, it's your responsibility. So my guess is that, yeah, there's definitely an ordinance, at least in those areas.
Right. They all have, I think, almost everywhere is going to have an actual ordinance. It's just the question is it a point of sale requirement, or can it be done by the buyer after the close?
Okay, I see. Yeah.
That's the difference.
When I was researching the San Diego property, I found a recorded document from 2011 when the city of San Diego amended their defensible space ordinance. So that means it was already on the books before that. So pretty much I would say everyone has an ordinance. It's just a matter of, is it local or state, and then is it required to be before or after escrow? Because again, this law didn't create any new ordinances. It just created the need to disclose this information. And going back to, Kristen, to your comment about the CAL FIRE, on the webinar I'd seen with CAL FIRE in San Diego, they were talking specifically about some of their properties, and they were talking about Ramona, and they said, if you ordered one, we looked on our records, and if we've already been out to your property within the last, I don't know how long they said it.
I think it was 6 months.
Yeah, 6 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll write back to you saying you don't need to have inspection, and here's proof that we've already done it. So they're actually, from my understanding, probably to a lot of their properties, they're going out on a regular basis and checking properties, and maybe the sellers don't even know about it. Because that's, when you talk about wildfires, usually we're worried about the rural areas because there's less, it's not like you have a city block where the fire department's just down the street kind of thing.
Right.
But it's easy to think that this is only going to affect rural areas, but like Troy had a listing facing Balboa Park in a condo, and it was in an applicable zone. And you wouldn't think that it's right in the middle of basically Hillcrest and Bankers Hill area, and it was in an applicable zone. So it's going to affect a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that whole area around Balboa Park comes back bright red. I guess because Balboa Park, has a lot of canyons. So even though
Troy, Troy, will you put in my listing that's coming up at the beginning of the year
Sure.
into that search? And it's in the city. It's actually in Oak Park. It's 3332 Spa Street. 92105 if you want to put that in.
Let's see. Whoa.
It's right on the edge.
Let's go closer.
Wow.
You're not.
She's one
Oh my
house
God.
away.
One house.
How lucky could you be?
Oh my gosh. I'm actually really glad that she's not, because she's kind of a stressed out
Yeah.
client. So like if I had to tell her that, she would be so stressed about cutting down trees. Like,
That's
oh my God.
literally like the house next door is, but
Yeah.
she's not.
Oh
But
my God.
see, that's part of how like confusing this whole thing is. Like one house away, and you would have had to have a whole completely different conversation.
That's
Yeah.
so funny. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I have a question actually. If we're on the buyer side and we're writing the offer and it's in a high fire zone, so what language should we put on? I mean, it's so confusing as it is right now, but do we do anything on the buyer side?
Well, so you know, I think again, over time, what we're going to see is that people might do that, just like they ask for a termite clearance up front. They might ask for this, you know, for the seller to pay for the, you know, you could probably just word it the FHDS inspection and certification, you know. So that would be my thought. But then again, if there's, you know, 10 offers and you want to get your offer accepted,
yes, it's no way in this market. No way. Yeah.
Right. But you know, we also don't want our buyers to be blindsided on that side too, because one of the biggest things that's going to happen with this law is there's going to be lawsuits after the close. If somebody's house burns down, the first thing that CAL FIRE is going to do is say, oh, well, you know, did your seller disclose X, Y, and Z? And if the buyer's like, nope, nobody told us about that, then people are on the hook. And
Troy, I could even see lawsuits just happening where, say, you know, your local inspector comes by, like Daniel was saying, that you might not even know because they just go by and do their checks, right?
Right.
And then you get a notice that, like, hey, you have to take care of this, and it's in the tens of thousands of dollars because you have 3 dead trees or something. Yes. I could see lawsuits coming from that too, not even from like an actual fire.
Correct.
But people having to, like, you know, realizing that, oh wow, I'm not in compliance, and now I'm gonna have a misdemeanor pretty quick if I don't take care of this.
Right. And you know, all of these, every single one of these, if it's in a high or very high fire, every single one of these options requires either the seller to have the compliance or the buyer to get it within a year. So you're absolutely right. You know, someone's going to need to inspect that property within a year of the closing. And if it comes back where there's lots of work to be done, the buyer's going to be like, whoa, shit. Exactly your point.
And not to be pessimistic, but, you know, we know all about, you know, especially downtown, any new condominium building at some point goes through litigation, right? So for windows, or they use the wrong seal on a pipe or something. So I could see that some attorney, you know, or attorneys could create a whole cottage industry of looking for properties that recently sold, looking to see if they're in a, you know, high zone, and then contacting the new owner and saying, did you get disclosed properly? And if not, let's sue the seller and make some money for you, even if nothing happened wrong, right? So
right.
I think for both sides, it's important that we make sure the seller and the buyer, and like for the Fox Run property that I was talking about earlier, we had a conversation with the seller, who happened to be my brother, but we had a conversation with the seller, explaining, and I did it in writing, even though it's family, explaining the pros and cons of this. And explaining what the buyer's side was saying, being the buyer's agent was saying, let's just have them sign this and put it in front of them. And if the buyers sign it, then great. So, you know, on the seller side, it's about making sure they're informed. On the buyer's side, it's also about making sure the buyer's informed. So, I would, if I was representing the buyer, I would take it case by case. If I was, you know, selling a condo, I may not be as worried about this up front, and I would maybe wait until we got into escrow with the NHG report and we saw, okay, it's in a high zone, then have a conversation. But if I was, you know, if it was a house that's on a canyon and there's a lot of trees around, maybe I would have a different conversation with the buyer even before I wrote an offer. So,
yeah, I agree with that, Daniel. I think it will behoove us as good agents to, you know, on a case-by-case basis, you know, if you're writing an offer on a place that's like obviously overgrown, like if you guys had seen or ever go see my property now, like that, I mean, that obviously has a lot of overgrowth, you know, so that would be something that you probably would, you know, if you were representing a buyer, not just myself, you'd probably want to be like, look, like, there's a lot of overgrowth here that's probably not in compliance. Like, obviously we're not experts in that, and I don't know if we need to say that up front about it, but I definitely agree that like it would be smart of us to have that in writing somewhere, just saying like that we've considered this up front, you know, and that here's the potential outcome, you know, should something go wrong, or should you need to come into compliance. So
Yeah,
anyway.
and I think it's all good points. Definitely pay attention, you know, kind of property specific for when we have the buyer. But I think it's, from a risk management standpoint, it's always a good idea to, you know, to admit, you know, we're not fire hardening experts. We're not attorneys. We don't interpret law. And, you know, I think having that honest conversation is perfectly fine. And then giving them the information, so you can give them the information on, you know, that link of how to, you know, the requirements for 5 feet away, for 50 feet away, for 100 feet away. And, you know, so send them the information, almost like we don't tell people school systems, but we tell them, hey, you can go online and, you know, look at ratings and do this and do that. We're feeding them the websites so that they can ask questions and different things and do their own research as well. I think that's, you know, the best that we can do to help protect them.
I have a question. For the condominiums, we cannot do that much. I mean, the situation that Daniel explained, I mean, it's you're either on the seller side or buyer side, but the HOA is involved. You can't touch the landscaping. So
correct. Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I think is that still needs to be clarified is, you know, obviously the law, because they said single family 1 to 4 units, so it does apply to condos the way that it's written. But you're right, the individual owner does not typically control anything to do with landscape. There are some that, you know, maybe they would, but what I envision though is probably that the local municipality, probably when they do an inspection, my guess is that they would do an inspection on the HOA once per year, and then they would clear the whole HOA. Same thing with CAL FIRE is, you know, maybe they already went to, you know, XYZ HOA and they cleared it a while back. But it seems silly to me that CAL FIRE or the others would, you know, it seems like maybe that the HOA management will need to just know that they need to get a yearly fire inspection if they're in that zone. It's like part of the responsibility of the board members to have that done. I don't think we're there yet. I don't, you know, I'm sure most board members don't even know to do that. But that's kind of the way I see it playing out over time, is that, that, you know, maybe when we get the HOA disclosures, there'll be some sort of, you know, are you in compliance, blah, blah, blah. But that's definitely a very, you know, and if you had a 30-day escrow or 60-day escrow, like, and there was work to be done,
yeah,
the seller couldn't get the board, you know, the board probably has to have a board meeting to expend, you know, to authorize the
it's gonna take
expenditure,
so long. Yeah.
cutting down a tree. So it's definitely convoluted.
The
So
interesting
the-
thing for the city of San Diego, I found the actual website and order form where you can submit an order for the city of San Diego to come out and do inspection. And on that form, it obviously asks, you know, the address and the property owner, and then it has a form, a field to put the HOA contact information if it's in the HOA, which I thought was interesting because, you know, why would you be ordering this inspection unless you felt like you needed to, but they knew that there could be circumstances where maybe the HOA and not the individual owner is the one that's responsible for addressing it. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see that they at least had that on their form.
I have one more question. The whole thing with the seller. So basically, we're telling them that, you know, do they have to do this form if it's in the fire zone? I mean, the inspection cost and the cost after, and if they don't do that, they may not pay anything.
Yeah, so if it's in one of the zones, they definitely have to, they have to disclose this form, the FH,
Yes.
you know, so that's really the thing they have to do. Now, interpreting the form, so then, you know, depends on what jurisdiction they're under. So, you know, if they're in the city versus the county, and so just trying to figure out whether there is a point of sale requirement or not, and you know, but they could always, if they wanted to go over and above, they could go ahead and order the inspection. In theory, that's the safest way to do it in terms of disclosures. The downside of that, though, is what if there's work to be done?
Yes.
You know, so we could have that conversation. We could actually say the safest thing to do as the seller in terms of risk management is to go ahead and you can order the inspection, have somebody come out. Hopefully they'll just bless the property. Good to go. You did your job, you know. But with that said, if you do the inspection, if there's work to be done, there's very tight restrictions on how quickly it needs to be done, and it for sure needs to be done. And it's based on the date of that inspection.
Yes.
So that way they kind of know the risk reward kind of thing.
But they still need to fill out this form, even if they don't want to go that route to do the inspection.
Correct. Yes. If they don't want to do the inspection, then they could check box number 3 on paragraph 4.
Okay. PG.
But that's assuming the buyer will agree to that.
Yeah, I mean,
The form is doing two things. There's the first half, which just says if it is or is not in one of these zones. And then if it is in the zone, then you can check boxes saying, you know, if it has single pane windows or things like that. So that's one half of the form. The second half of the form is just this actual inspection for defensible space. So it's like two forms in one almost because of that.
Yeah, and it's basically, you know, is the seller taking the responsibility to have the inspection and certify that they're in compliance, or is the seller intending to pass that to the buyer to have it done on their own within a year? And a little bit fuzzy in terms of, do they even have the right to ask the buyer to do it based on which municipality they're under?
sure.
And before doing an inspection, that website that's on the forum, the readyforwildfire.org. It does have like good information. It has diagrams and has, you know, drawing of a house and within the first 5 feet, with the first 50 feet. And it says, it breaks it down. So if you were going to, if it's getting to the point where a seller was going to probably have to have inspection, they can look up front and kind of probably get an idea of, oh yeah, we do have that tree and it's really close to this and that's gonna be a problem, or this bush is dead and we need to remove it. So they'll have an idea before an inspector even comes out as to what maybe problem areas they might have. So it, you know, hopefully wouldn't be a complete surprise, but it is a little scary because it's almost like writing a blank check of, you know, if there's a bunch of work that needs to be done.
Can you email us this website that Troy has open, as well as the one you were talking about, Daniel?
Yeah, and the nice thing too, the NHD companies are starting to incorporate this a lot more. I don't know about all of them, but I know on my NHD, they have a whole page with the diagram that comes from the Ready for Wildfire, and then they have a link which goes to this site right here. So it's, you know, if you haven't done anything up front, at least when you get the NHD, they'll have that. That's my NHD. I don't know like if Disclosure Source has that yet or others, but I imagine they'll all have that because they have to disclose already if it is or is not in one of these zones. And so they're probably, you know, kind of boosting up the reports a bit for that. But yeah, we have the exact links for these. So you can see that.
As well as where to have the seller order the inspection if they want to. We'll have those links. And then
yeah, that'd be great.
Kristen, also for the on the form itself, there's let me move this. There's it's printed in there, ready.wildfire.org. So that's a great one. Like that would be kind of step one for your sellers. And even potentially buyers, they could go look at that because, like Daniel was saying, that's going to tell them whether there's any work that they could, you know, potentially do up front before they even have an inspection if they wanted to. You know, like if there's dead bushes or whatever, if there's a tree branch touching the house.
And that website also helps. It explains, because like the paragraph 3B right there where they have to check boxes, some people may have no idea what those things are. You know, single pane, that's kind of obvious, but
I was literally just reading these and I was like, I don't know if I even know, like, I don't even know what all of these are.
And I'll tell you, like, we use Glide, you know, to have the sellers fill out the TDS and SPQ, and it, like, I love Glide and the way it works. On the recent transaction we had up in Orange County, we actually, you can have this form sent to the seller to fill out in the same way through Glide. And it's kind of, I would not recommend it, because what it does is it sends them and it asks them up front, is this home in or not in a high fire hazard severity zone? And it's like, if you haven't had the discussion, they're like, I don't know. And then it asks these other things and they have to basically say, I don't know. But that readyforwildfire.org, it has examples of what all these things are. Like, so if someone's not sure, you're not the one saying, well, it would be this, or your home does or doesn't have it. It's another third-party reference where you can say, go to this website and here's where it shows, you know, what these things are. Because the tricky thing about this form too is, if you up at the top it says this, you know, is a required disclosure if it's 1 to 4 units, if it's this, if it's a TDS required, and it's located in the high zone. And then at the bottom, paragraph 2, where it says you check it saying it's not in the zone, then by what you're saying is the seller just providing this as an advisory. And if they fill out 3B, it's kind of voluntary. That to me is a little risky, because if the seller checks the box on 2B and then they just say, well, we're not in the zone, so I'm not going to worry about those, but maybe it really does have one of those vulnerabilities, that's kind of a gray area for me that I feel like it's a little risky. But
yeah, like, because they're like, they should probably still disclose it even if they're not in a high fire zone,
right? Especially now that it's in writing on something they're signing. So
yeah, I think you know, they they could for sure know whether they have single pane windows though. So that, and then also it's, the question is saying, are you aware? So,
Right.
I think it would probably be better to go ahead and you know, ask them to read this, wildfire.org.
Like combustible landscaping, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah, well that always threw me too, because I'm like, well, there's a bush right there, but
Right, but if it's
dead bush
alive, does
or-
that mean it's not combustible? You know, like
right. Well, yeah, in theory, anything that's carbon based could be combustible. I don't know. It's, yeah, the whole thing is it's a little unnerving.
or other materials. Like, what if you have a wood deck? It's like, yeah, that'll burn.
Yeah, right. Yep. Definitely true. So yeah, so now you kind of know why we wanted to have this conversation. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
for
Yeah,
joining
thanks,
in.
Troy.
Yeah, do you guys have any more questions?
I think I'm good.
Me too.